about the laws of tzitzis. We are in Shulchan Aruch. We are in Orach Chaim, so the general daily laws. We are in Siman Tes, chapter 9, and we're going to learn about which garments are obligated in tzitzis and which are exempt. So the Torah tells us that al arba kanfos kesuscha, that on the four corners of our garment that we should put tzitzis. Okay, and we learn that that is a requirement. So what is considered a garment that would be obligated? Is it everything? We have wool, we have linen, we have leather, we have metal. What do you have to put these tzitzis on? The Torah commands it for us. So it doesn't say, it just says that you have to put on your garments. So this is what we're going to talk about today. So the Shulchan Aruch starts off here in 9.1, halacha number 1 over here. He says that the garments that are obligated according to the Torah are garments made from linen and garments made from the wool of sheep. Okay? And it's very, very specific. Okay, so it's be from sheep wool or linen. But if it's made from the wool of other types of mammals, that's only a rabbinic one. Okay, so it can be made of other types of wool. However, the Ramah adds a note over here and says that according to other opinions, all of these garments are included in the Torah's requirement to put tzitzis on these garments. Now, just a little bit of clarification. We'll learn later on in the next siman that tzitzis is a personal obligation. So if I have a bunch of square garments lying around the house, if I never wear them, they never require tzitzis. So really what we're saying over here is if I'm making myself a garment and I want to wear that, or if I make something that could be a garment, I'll have to put tzitzis on it in order to fulfill the obligation of wearing a garment of 4 tzitzis. And so the first thing that we say over here is that the tzitzis are required to be placed onto a garment of wool or linen. Okay, so that's the requirement here. So the Mishnah Berurah has some comments over here. He says the following. Okay, that the reason why we know that these garments are obligated is because we have to compare it to another place in Torah where it talks about the requirements of what garments are considered a beged. So the only other place where that happens is by the case of Mitzora, where there is a blight on a fabric. And over there, the things that are called garments there are things mentioned made from linen and wool. So therefore, based on context, we assume that those would be the same thing that you would be wearing tzitzis on according to the Torah law for a talis garment. Okay, so talis is just the garment itself. The tzitzis are the actual fringes hanging on the edge. The second thing we say over here is that the garment has to be made from the wool of sheep. Okay, so that's what we say. And the Mishnah Berurah adds it could also be the rams as well, but it has to be that specific species. Other species such as camel, okay, goat, silk, rabbit, okay, all of those things, even hemp, all of these other types of things, they are not considered a garment according to the Torah, according to this opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. And the only reason why you would put tzitzis on them is because the rabbi said you should put tzitzis on all of these garments and everything that looks like that. Now, if there's an intermingled species, such as an ewe born to a goat, so the Shulchan Aruch himself, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Yosef Karo, says that this is considered another species and therefore is not obligated. Okay. However, the same rule applies to all of these things, so that if you make tzitzis out of these other species, other things, you have to make it from that same thing, except for wool tzitzis that were attached to these, then that would be fine. Now, if you made a mix of materials, you mix in wool together a bunch of other of these wools, you follow the majority. If the majority is wool, then it's considered to be a Torah level obligation. Okay, and if it's a majority of anything else, goat, camel, that's something else. Now, that would be the same thing if you took goat and camel and mixed it with linen. It wouldn't be a prohibition of shatnez, and if it was mostly linen mixed with those, then it would be a Torah level obligated garment, and you would have to wear it. Okay? And that's assuming that it was all mingled together, but not if you went and not when you make separate threads. Okay? So then if you make, let's say you take strands of wool and you go in one direction, you take strands of camel hair and go in the other direction, that's not considered a mix. They're considered independent things, and that's not the mix that they were referring to. They have to be mixed together so that the mixture, the majority, would look more like wool, because it's considered batel barov. It is considered nullified in the majority. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch, we're continuing his opinion. The Mishnah Berurah expands on it, that when you make the garment out of those things that are not wool or linen, so it's from camel or goat or hemp, there is a rabbinic mitzvah to wear tzitzis on these garments, and you'd still make a brach on it as well. Okay, it does mean that there are a couple of different what we call nafkaminas. There are a couple of different differences regarding these two things. Okay, number one, you should try to get, according to his first opinion, you should try to get garments made from wool or linen, because then you're fulfilling a Torah obligation. Okay. And now let's say you had the tzitzis were mixed up and people made a bunch of threads. Some of the threads were for the sake of the mitzvah of tzitzis, which we'll learn about in the coming chapter. Then you could go ahead and use that mixture, but if it's a Torah level, then you could not use anything from that mixture, because when it's a doubt, if you're not sure on a Torah level, you have to be stringent, safek de'oraisa l'chumra, and if it's rabbinic material, it's safek de'rabbanan l'kula, you can be lenient. Okay, another difference is that there's a case of where someone rips their tzitzis and they would lose their one of their shirts as a result of wearing it, and it became and it was during a weekday, and basically it tear one of the tzitzis in such a fashion that the garment is no longer considered halakhically finished with tzitzis. Right? You rip one, so you only have 3 kosher tzitzis on a 4-corner garment. So you're basically wearing a non-mitzuyetz garment, a garment that is not properly tzitzed, not properly tasseled. So if it's a rabbinic one, then you don't have to take it off immediately, as opposed to the other one. But we'll get into that. Those things come later on in chapter 13. Okay, so let's talk about the Ramah. The Ramah says that all these garments are obligated from the Torah. Okay, and it says that there's a couple of things that happen over this. So that all of these garments, from the goat and the camel and the hemp, are all considered things that have corners on them. So, and you have to make the tzitzis from the same material as whatever the corner is made from, so whatever the garment is made from. So, even if it's not from wool or linen, the tzitzis, the tassels at the end of it, hanging on the corners, should be made from the same material as the garment. Okay? And we also know that you shouldn't mix wool and linen together. Okay? And so therefore we say that these garments, meaning from wool or linen, can go ahead and be exempted by using wool or linen strings for the tzitzis. And then if it's something else, if it's goat hair, then you could go ahead and attach wool to them or their own kind to them. But you can't attach goat to camel and camel to goat and so on and so forth. Okay? And the reason why the Ramah picks this one, since later authorities, especially those in his country, and even earlier as well, they say that this is the case, and so therefore that's his. He says that's the halacha. Okay, so he says that's the halacha here in Ashkenaz lands. However, the Mishnah brings down that people should wear, whether it's a talis gadol or talis katan, whether it's the big one that you wear over your whole body or underneath. It's better just use a wool one to get yourself out of this dispute. Okay, let's look at halacha 2 over here. Okay, so we mentioned this halacha a little bit. So if you have the strings for the tassels, for the tzitzis, are made from either linen or from wool. Okay? So they're going to go ahead and fulfill the obligation for the garment. Okay? So the difference is going to be when the cases of tzitzis or linen are put on a garment of wool, or tzitzis of wool are placed on a garment of linen, because nowadays we need to have also this blue thread called techeles. And however, nowadays without that, this would be considered a forbidden mixture, which if it was around, it wouldn't be. We can talk about that in a moment when we get to the Mishnah Berurah. And the Ramah brings down a stringency who say that we should never make tzitzis out of linen ever. Okay? They're never to put on other garments. So that's a stringency the Ramah brings out not to do. Okay? And so there's further opinions brought down in the Mishnah Berurah over here. One opinion over here says that there are people who are stringent that you shouldn't even make wool tzitzis for anything else. So if it's made out of cotton, camel, goat, okay, and so therefore you should only be using a wool garment with wool tzitzis. But we don't do that. Our custom is not to do that. And in many people, they say that that's what we do, is we follow this opinion, and this is even the opinion of the Vilna Gaon. Okay? So there was an interesting exemption, the Mishnah Berurah explains, that in the time when we had techeles, or times when we had techeles, that you would be allowed to put tzitzis onto a wool garment that were blue and white. So interestingly, the Mishnah Berurah sides with the opinion of the Rabbit, who says it would be 2 and 2, 2 of white and 2 of blue. Okay? And it was colored with the blood of the chilazon, is how he says it. And through this, that was the proper Torah commandment for tzitzis. Okay? And you would tie it to the garment, and that's technically shatnez, to tie wool onto linen, and linen onto wool, where you make a knot into it that's a permanent knot. Okay, so, and that's what the Ramah is referring to, is that all types of garments being obligated, that they would have been allowed to use a mixture of even wool and linen, so that way they would permit the garment to be worn as a properly mitzuyetz, as a properly tzitzed talis. Okay, let's go on to halacha 3. Okay, if tzitzis are made of something else, and they're not, that's meaning that's not wool, not linen. So the Shulchan Aruch is following his opinion. So therefore, silk tzitzis need to be made, can be put on a silk garment. Cotton tzitzis are cotton garments, but a garment without tzitzis does not fulfill any type does not fulfill any rabbinic requirement. Okay. And so what we say is that this is only according to the Shulchan Aruch's opinion. So that is when we say that he didn't feel that other materials were obligated, and so therefore he is saying that if you do tie those garments to anything else, it doesn't fulfill the obligation. Either Ramah agrees with this. So that's an extension of that. He doesn't really totally change it off over here. So there's some issues that get into types of garment mixtures that we might see nowadays. Okay, so this applies to both the Ramah's opinion from number one and the Shulchan Aruch's opinion, except for one important thing is that you would be allowed to nowadays still take wool and attach it to these to fix it. Now the question is, what if you have different types of mixtures? Okay, so if you have different types of threads, one going in one direction, the other going in the other one. Let's call it the warp and the weft or the woof, right? So, but let's just call it one direction, the other direction, to make that little box shape that famously holds garments together. Okay, so if you were to take each of these, let's say you take one from camel and one from goat. Okay, so you can't do anything with that except to put linen tzitzis on it or wool tzitzis on it. Okay. Okay, so, and you have to actually take and spin and twist these things for the sake of the mitzvah. So if it's made of silk, silk tzitzis. Cotton garments. Okay, so, and it doesn't matter if you went ahead and attached linen or wool fabric on the bottom. So the top half on your body would be made from cotton or silk, and then you attach a wool garment on the bottom. You would still have to make the tzitzis out of silk, okay? However, you would still be allowed to use wool tzitzis for that. And according to the Shulchan Aruch, you're going to have a real problem if you make a garment where the one direction is silk and the other direction is wool. And this is actually a more common problem in some suit mixtures more than anything else, in suit jackets. That's where you normally would see this, but let's just work with that fabric. It's not an uncommon combination, but let's work with it here for a second, because basically what we're talking about is if you have one direction going in the garment that is made from silk and the other direction is made from wool, and this does happen, like I said. So you only would be allowed to use wool tzitzis, okay, because that's going to exempt all the materials. Okay, so you shouldn't use silk on that case. So, and if there was so much silk in that you can't see the wool on its own, okay, but you can definitely see but you know that it's in there because you open up some of the threads. So nonetheless, still make them out of wool because everyone will be happy with wool, and even though you technically could use silk. Okay. And as we learned previously, having the tzitzis garment made completely out of wool is preferable to having a mixture in. And so according to the Ramah, who says you shouldn't make linen tzitzis, if you made a mixture of linen and cotton, then you can't make the tzitzis out of cotton, and you can't make them out of wool, and you shouldn't make them out of linen. So that's the only type of garment that's really going to have a problem. Okay, let's talk about halacha number 4 now. If you have a talis that is made from non-wool or linen materials, okay, made from silk, cotton, anything like that. So, and you have some of the tzitzis that are made from wool, and some made from the material itself. So we don't know if that would work or not. Okay, because you're missing two things. You're not using the same material exactly as the garment itself, and you're not following the rule that you can use wool tzitzis or all linen tzitzis to exempt it. Okay. And so the only leniency that the Mishnah Berurah mentions is that if you had half the strings of one and half the string of the other, that would be okay. And he quotes a book called the Art Chaim, which is written on a small section of the beginning of Orach Chaim. That brings that leniency. Halacha number 5. Some people say that you have to make the tzitzis the same color as a talis, and people who are really careful will do that. Okay? The Ramah as the Ashkenazi custom is not to make the tzitzis any other color. Rather, they only use white for tzitzis. Okay, and even when the garment themselves are of multicolors. So the reason why the Shulchan Aruch says to make it that same color is because the idea that it's somehow glorifying the mitzvah. Okay, and so some people say that's an actual requirement based on the fact that we say that the tzitzis need to be from the material of the garment itself, which includes the colors. So the Mishnah Berurah also explains that to only have white tzitzis, that everyone should also make their whole garment, whether it's talis gadol or talis katan, also white, or at least majority white. So that way when you make the tzitzis white, it follows the same requirement as well. Okay? And he says, now you see on some of our garments, we make these little stripes on it that's supposed to be a reminder of Techeles. So we go after the main part of the talis. So what he's saying is that you could make other colored stripes on it, but just so it has to be the minority of it. So those blue stripes that you have on it, or the black stripes you have on it, or silver stripes that you have on it, need to not be from the majority. Majority should be white. Last halacha in chapter 9, some tests today. We said there are some who say that you shouldn't make a talis out of linen, even though that's not the halacha. Okay. So a God-fearing person should make a talis out of wool, and therefore they fulfill the Torah obligation without any problem. So this is the Shulchan Aruch's final statement. The Ramah says if it is only possible for a person to use a talis of linen, so then you should use a talis made of linen with linen tzitzis, as opposed to avoiding the mitzvah altogether. So even though we have a minhag not to do it, somehow you went to, let's say, a Sparta country and they had a linen talis, and that was the only talis had available, that's fine. Okay, then you should go ahead and use it. Now, the Mishnah Berurah explains, what's this issue with linen? So the rabbis made a rule that, so you're going to have a garment that's made out of linen, and then the tzitzis are made out of linen. And you might try to put a blue string in there. This is back in the day when they knew it, and nowadays also for those of you who have the availability, access to the chelas strings nowadays. And the problem is you might make that blue techeles string out of wool because it was difficult to color linen in the blue color. So you would have several strings, or he brings them 2 and 2. So some people, for example, the Rambam holds that techeles is 3 that are white and 1 that is blue. And there's one other opinion, which is there's a bunch of opinions, but one other opinion of the Sefer HaChinuch says that you make half of 1 string blue, and so you have 3.5 white. And so the problem was you might wear these at night, and then you would have kilayim. You would have a mixture that is not permitted because you're only allowed to set it aside for this mitzvah because the Torah says you may. Okay, and so nowadays, even though most people wouldn't be doing this, the original rule should still apply. Okay, so that's what the Shulchan Aruch holds. But a number of people disagree with the Shulchan Aruch, and they say that this is only if you have techeles in it, and not if you don't have techeles in it. So if you just have all linen strings, then you could wear a talis made out of linen, no problem. Okay, and that's why, according to Ramah, in a case of great need, you could do that. So too, that you could have a talis of linen or another talis of any other thing with linen tzitzis on it. Okay, in order that you should have the mitzvah. And this may also be for somebody who, let's say, they lost everything and they only have access to these types of garments to make a tzitzis, and a talis for themselves. And the Mishnah Berurah adds on the words of the Ramah, so that not only may you wear it, you may also make a bracha on it. Okay. And if you do have a talis made from wool, you should make a bracha on that first. I don't know when you would have that situation. Because if you had that one, just wear that one and don't wear this one. But that's what he says. And so that's the last thing they want to say about this. Is one other halacha over here, but really it's not really pertinent to the case over here. One other interesting halacha about garments. Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked many years ago about the use of synthetic materials to make garments for tzitzis, and he held that these garments are definitely not included in what the Torah considered to be garments. And since these materials are completely synthetic and they weren't even perceived as garments at the time of the Torah, unlike everything else, they are not obligated in tzitzis, and therefore one would not put tzitzis on these, and you couldn't make a bracha on them. There are people who disagree, like Rav Shvi Pesach Frank Zatzal, but Rav Moshe's opinion seems to be the most common. They very rarely make any tzitzis out of nylon, but there are those who would say that you could. Some people have made nylon tzitzis that have holes in them that are perforated. This may not be considered a kosher garment either, because there's mostly open space and not enough closed space, so this may not qualify as a garment. Even though it looks like it could function as one. So if it looks kind of like what we call a pinny, one of those things you pull over your shirts, you should try to avoid not getting those. But there are people who would permit these things. So these are all possible situations, but it's best to try to avoid them. And one other interesting fact over here. Okay, so if you're going to make a talis, this is the Kaf Chaim adds in the over here. If you're going to make a talis out of silk or out of cotton, then you actually should make the tzitzis from silk and cotton, according to these opinions. Okay. Now, if you have linen available, he says then you should use those. Okay, and then make that instead. And so he doesn't say if there's a between the Ramah or anybody else. So I'm checking over here. So then you may go ahead and make pishtim, but it sounds like it would be preferred for the Ramah that if you had to make everything, you might be better off using the type of talis, but it seems that that's not the case. He's even being lenient to allow you to use linen as well. Okay, so that's the most important thing. Okay, thank you everyone for joining this as we continue on our series talking about the laws of talis. Make sure to check out our short about how to put a talis on, and with this class we'll talk a little bit more about other garments and things that could be obligated in tzitzis. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.